Donald Trump slams Judge Chutkan, but he uses her own words. And a lot of people are saying, oh, this is Donald Trump taking himself outside of her orders, which limit what he can say. And we're all asking ourselves, well, what are you talking about? They're her words. He just posted exactly what she said. And he did post this on Truth Social. And here is the quote. And we'll read the before and after language for full context. But he said this, and you'll notice here, it's attributed appropriately to Judge Tanya Chutkan. Dropped this one August 13th, 9:56 p.m. He says the following, quote, I see the videotapes. I see the footage of the flags and the signs that people were carrying and the hats that they were wearing. This is Judge Chutkan speaking. And the garb and the people who mobbed that Capitol were there in fealty, in loyalty to one man, not to the Constitution, of which most of the people who come before me seem woefully ignorant, not to the ideals of this country and not to the principles of democracy. It's a blind loyalty to one person who, by the way, remains free to this day. Signed by Judge Tanya Chutkan. Actually, this came from an oral sentencing where she was communicating this to a defendant. And it's very curious here because guess who still remains free after having come through her courtroom? Judge Tanya Chutkan freed Donald Trump. So this is the double standard on display even within the prosecutions. Okay, there are double standards outside of the prosecutions. Trump gets prosecuted, Hunter doesn't. J6ers get prosecutors, BLMers don't. But even within the prosecutions, there are double standards. So this judge will sit here and lecture this defendant who's probably sat in custody for a long time and says, yeah, but you have blind loyalty to Trump. One person, by the way, who remains free. Well, when Trump was in your courtroom, Judge, you didn't do anything about it. You had the ability, if he was the lead insurrectionist who was responsible for all of this monstrosities, mob the Capitol in loyalty to one man, Trump. Well, why didn't you hold him in custody then? If he was really the big insurrectionist that almost took over the whole country, you've got a bunch of other people who've come through your courtroom and you did not let them out. You blamed them and Trump for keeping them in custody. And now Trump waltzes through and you're just like, oh, have a good day. See ya. So what's the deal? Were you concerned then, but you're not concerned now for the more serious crime, or you're not really concerned about both and you're just being performative, and you can't be as performative with Donald Trump as you can be with innocent J6ers who don't have half the country at their back, if not, dramatically more than that. So Trump gets a ton of benefits. He's out free, but a lot of J6ers are not. And this judge, for some reason, has an inconsistency in her rulings. Why is that, Judge? Curious. Now, she did give a big lecture to a J6er when he came through her court. Here's what the language said. At the top, she says, every single time that I see a videotape, this is Judge Chutkan at a sentencing for another J6er. Every time I see a videotape of what happened, I'm struck anew with both the horror of what was going on that day and how close we came to not fulfilling one of the basic functions of our democracy, which is a peaceful transfer of power, which we lecture other governments all over the world on. Yeah, and they're going to be lecturing us for prosecuting our political enemies. I mean, that's amazing. How can you have a peaceful transfer of power when one of the top political opponent to the institution in charge is to jail him and to prosecute him? So they're lecturing all of us about the peaceful transfer of power as they now strip away the right to vote from the American citizens themselves by prosecuting the leading candidate. So she's still lecturing the J6ers and says, and we're supposed to be an example of we were not that day. And so while Mr. Langmack is correct in that your background didn't involve any criminal activity, it's never been in trouble before ever, the events of that day and the seriousness of those events cannot be understated, okay? This was nothing less than an attempt to violently overthrow the government. The legally, lawfully, peacefully elected government by individuals who were mad that their guy lost. That's Trump. This is the same judge who's presiding over his case. She says, I see the videotapes. This is the quote we read. I see the footage of the flags and the signs the people were carrying and the hats they were wearing and the garb. And she's doing this, right? This is a big performance. It's like theater drama class in court. I see the videotapes. I see the footage of the flags and the signs the people were carrying. The people who mobbed the Capitol. Loyalty to one man, Trump. Not to the Constitution, of which most people come before me are idiots, bunch of Trumpers, woefully ignorant, not as smart as me. I know the Constitution. Not to the ideals of this country, not to the principles of democracy. It's a blind loyalty to a person who, by the way, remains free to this day. And she didn't do anything about it after all of this lecturing and hysteria. Couldn't even do anything about the guy who led the whole thing, huh? There is no mob without the members of the mob, as I've said before. So Mr. Langmack made a point in his sentencing memo that if we were to take your participation out of that group and everything would have still happened, your actions did not materially contribute, but they did because you were there. And people act in ways that they would never act alone when they're with a group, when emotions are involved. But in terms of the seriousness of the offense, it cannot be understated, Mr. J6 defendant, how serious this was and how horrifying it was to the country, and the fact that the divisions that were already existing in this country were worsening and we're more divided than ever now, and it was exacerbated by that day. And you're one of the few defendants, Miss Priola, and maybe it's because I've talked about it every single sentencing that I've done to at least acknowledge the harm that was done to people there. And so, right, she got a sentence. I'm sure it wasn't pretty because this judge has already come to her conclusion. Blind loyalty to Trump, and he was going to wreck the principles of democracy, a violent overthrow of the government. People are just, they had control of the entire thing in hours. They voted back that day. That podium guy didn't even make it with the podium. Shout out to podium guy. So, okay, this is what she has said. And now she's going to be a fair and impartial judge on this entire thing. So Trump is exercising some serious free speech. And we're going to see what the government says. But this one is just him repeating her words. Not even a big thing, but they're already calling it an attack. Why would they call it an attack? Let's say this. If Trump posted another statement from Judge Chutkan, it says, remain in agreement with your release conditions. Stay bound to your release conditions. If Trump put that in quotes and truthed it, nobody would say anything about it. Those would be her words, and it would just be the standard words. But when he quotes that statement, they now call it an attack. Why? It's because it exposes her massive, deep cavern of bias and partisanship. So using her own words is now an attack because it exposes the weakness in their case. Now, Trump is also exercising even more free speech. Here is another quote that he posted on True Social. He said, I'm reading reports that failed former governor, Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Geoff Duncan, name spelt wrong, which is just great. It's Geoff. I think he probably knows that. Says he will be testifying before the Fulton County grand jury. He shouldn't. I barely know him, but he was, right from the beginning of this witch hunt, a nasty disaster for those looking into the election fraud that took place in Georgia. Trump says he refused to have a special session to find out what went on, became very unpopular with Republicans. I refused to endorse him, and fought the truth all the way. A loser. He went to FNCNN. FNCCNN. And so that's another thing that Trump posted, and a lot of the people in the media are hyperventilating about this. This is witness tampering. This is Trump who's going to interfere with this process. And so Geoff Duncan, Geoff, got asked about this when he was on there with CNN.
Geoff Duncan. We're also joined by former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Geoff, I want to start with you and get your reaction to that social media post by Donald Trump. He's insulting you and calling you out. Do you believe he's trying to intimidate you as a witness?
Uh-oh. Well, this close into my testimony, which is going to be tomorrow, I'm going to refrain from any comment with the exception of saying, which was just pointed out, he did misspell my name.
And how about what you are anticipating you'll be asked about tomorrow? If you won't comment on what Trump said, can you at least give us an idea of what you're anticipating?
Well, I'm just going to answer the questions as presented to me, much like I did in the special grand jury. Whatever the questions are, to the best of my ability, I'm going to answer the questions. And, this is an important part of the healing process for the Republican Party. This is painful. This may feel ugly to some, but this is part of this process, right? We've got to put these facts and figures and details and reality on display for America, specifically for Republicans to see what reality really is. And the social media game that Donald Trump has played over the years, it's shallow, right? You don't have to be any more than a few hundred characters worth of information with no facts behind it, with no details to stir the crowd. And that's certainly been his game for a number of years, and it looks like it's continuing.
Notable that you are not the only person he has gone after on social media. He's also targeted a number of other officials involved in these investigations.
We're all going to heal now because the good Republicans are going to root out the bad Republicans. Now, we all know that these prosecutions and these efforts are nothing more than political shams, and we can go back and connect the dots. In fact, they've done that over at Zero Hedge, article courtesy of Mark Pellin at Headline USA. Said very interestingly that the judge in the January 6th trial, this one, Judge Chutkan, the one that we just heard lecture at the J6ers, worked at a law firm that repped Russia and the hoax brought by Fusion GPS, that whole scandal. Christopher Steele, the Russia PP tape, the Sussman saga, where Michael Sussman, who used to work for a law firm that was hired by the Hillary Clinton campaign, took this fake story, tried to shove it down the FBI's throat via Jim Baker. Jim Baker resided at the FBI until he went over to Twitter. Jake Sullivan sold the story on Twitter as that the FBI's investigating Russian collusion, and then they took that over to the media and said, oh, the FBI's investigating, so you better investigate. And then when the media looked into it, they went back to the FBI and said, oh, look, the media's investigating. And the judge used to work at the law firm where a lot of this was going on. Previously worked at a law firm that represented Fusion GPS, the company that was outsourced to help do this whole thing. She did a stint at Boies Schiller Flexner, Democrat-friendly law firm that also represented Huma Abedin, wife of Democrat Anthony Weiner. So all very much connected. The stunning revelations came in the wake of reports that Obama-appointed judge worked at the same Flexner law firm, the same law firm that also reportedly represented Burisma. Trump blasted the conflicts. He said the following, "There is no way I can get a fair trial trial with the judge. Everybody knows this, and so does she. We will be immediately asking for a recusal of this judge, and likewise for a venue change. Chutkan was forced to recuse herself from the bench when she was overseeing Fusion GPS's attempt to block Devin Nunes and Kash Patel from outing the source of payments that funded the Steele dossier. Patel brought this up. Kash is asking, she recused on her own from that case. I wonder why. He says, we found out that her law firm Boyce Schiller represented Fusion GPS, the very client that was in front of her and was one of her former clients. He's saying she cannot neutrally preside over this case and that she's got to recuse. So it's going to continue to get spicy, my friends. We've got now Donald Trump using her own words against her. We'll, of course, continue to cover it because we love that free speech, and so does Donald Trump.